Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. We'll get started in just 1 minute. So settle in, get comfortable, top up your coffee, but hurry, and we'll get started in just 30 seconds. All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Boomers, Retirees, and the Mature Adult Learner, presented by UPCEA and MindEdge. A lot of research has been conducted over the last few years to help illustrate the reality that adult learners are far from an homogeneous group. While a significant portion of the research is focused on younger generations, specifically Gen Z and millennials, less has been conducted on professionals 50 and older. To better understand the segment of learners, UPCEA and MindEdge commissioned a survey of the group and published the outcomes in a recently released report, One Size Doesn't Fit All, Differences Among Boomer Learners, Retirees, and the Mature Adult Learner. We're delighted today to feature the principals of the UPCEA team who conducted the research, and to hear from a panel of hired professionals working in service of this population. Bruce, if you'd advance the slide to show our panel. Yeah, during the session, we'll hear from a wide range of folks, including these delightful folks you see on the screen, to talk through the research. And then we'll hear from our panel of our higher ed professionals working in service of this population. After the panel, we anticipate having time for Q&A. So please use the chat to submit. Brad, when you're ready.
I am ready. Welcome, mature learners and aspiring mature learners. And thank you, Chris. I'm Brad Neuenhouse, MindEdge Chief Business Officer, baby boomer, AARP member, and lifelong learner. Leading up to this, I thought to take inventory of what I've had to learn since age 50. And it was a much bigger list than I thought. It kind of mapped my professional journey. At age 52, I left database marketing and got into K-12 education, where I had to learn how to do teacher professional development, as well as write district literacy plans. I had to learn how to connect with school districts, principals, and superintendents. And then in my early 60s, I left K-12 to join MindEdge, where I had to learn online learning and everything about online learning, from instruction to technologies, and how to talk about online learning to academic partners. Also had to learn how to become a nonprofit board member. So there's lots of learning going on. It's interesting though, as I did that learning, I had to learn like lots of new tools. I had to learn Salesforce. I had to learn HubSpot. I had to learn Gong. I had to learn how to be a remote worker. I had to learn all the technologies that enable me to work remotely. I had to learn Zoom and Google Suite. And most recently, I've had to learn Wordle, which has been a lot of fun. So with that said, I'm sure others of you have as equally interesting learning paths. But when we thought about this segment, it's 90 million strong. And as you can imagine, there's a great demand for learning in the segment. And when we joined with UPCEA, we decided to kind of demystify and understand this 90 million 50 plus population. Because as you know, people are living longer, working longer, and learning longer. And as I just demonstrated, and I'm sure it's the case for many of you, as you age, learning doesn't stop. It becomes more of an imperative. The study, Baby Boomer Learners, Retirees, and Mature Adult Learner, it's revealing, and I think most importantly, it's actionable. As Chris mentioned earlier, this group is far from homogeneous. And in fact, we found that the mature learners fall into 4 distinct segments with different motivations, needs, and stages, which Jim and Bruce will get into today. But what does that mean to continuing educators? It means that by reaching the 50 plus population, you'll be able to better position your course catalog, shape programs, and reach the audience to spark greater interest in enrollments. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Bruce, who've done an outstanding job with the survey, the data analysis, and summary observations. I'm sure you're going to find it to be great value. Jim?
Thank you for that, Brad. I'll hop in here. My name is Bruce Etter. I'm the Director of Research and Consulting with UPCEA. I've had the pleasure of working with the fine folks at MindEdge for many years now, and we collaborated closely for this study. So as we've stated earlier, really the goal is to provide actionable insights for one, our member institutions, but two, higher education as a whole. Right? We want to better understand what are the content needs of these learners, what are the delivery preferences, what sort of motivations and unique qualities are among these groups. And really the goal for that is then we can act upon it, right? We can adjust our portfolios accordingly. We can adjust our marketing messages accordingly, all those sorts of things. So to do this, we did a study of almost 1,000 people, 997, of which 546 qualified and completed the study. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the demographics here and talk about a few of the qualifying questions before we get into the detailed results. I think it's really important that we understand what audience we're talking about before we start talking about the findings within that audience. So of this initial 1,000 folks, we first filtered by age group. So anyone that was under the age of 50 was terminated from the study, which is why you'll see the N value decreasing among the various groups here. We also wanted to know where they were in their career, right? What sort of stage were they at? And over half, 53%, were retired. Another third were either employed full-time or part-time, with more being full-time than part-time. And I think those are both really important metrics to keep in mind moving forward. Additionally, we also want to know how much education they've already had to date. A little over a quarter, 26%, had a bachelor's degree. Then the second highest group was the high school diploma or GED crowd, and then followed by those that had some college and no degree. So these three populations accounted for the largest portion of our group. So the next qualification question we wanted to ask is, how interested are they in learning new skills, learning about new subjects, receiving additional training, or continuing their education? And so overall, we found that over 3/4, 77%, were at least somewhat interested, right? About a quarter are the extremely interested folks, a fifth, the very interested folks, and then another third at the somewhat interested stage there. But we wanted to also know that those that weren't interested, why? What was the main reason there? And the main reason, in fact, was that they were retired or were nearing retirement. They also felt too old, or that there was no need. They were satisfied. They were content. And then another portion had a disability or health problem. And then another portion just straight up wasn't interested. So to better kind of personify these groups and these learners, we started to segment things using some K-means cluster analysis. And so we segmented on a few different things. We segmented on age group, we also segmented on employment status, and then we segmented on gender. And those ultimately led us to our learners here, our mature adult learners. And we gave them some names and provided some data there to kind of help fill in the gaps and kind of make this a little bit more tangible. But we ended up with these four: Madeline, Joshua, Norman, and Lisa. And there's a lot of text here and there's a lot more in the report, but the general idea is just keep in mind that these are representing real people, right? These are real populations, each with their own unique qualities, right? And so moving forward, thinking about that, these are the folks that we want to kind of keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jim and he'll dive into some of the detailed results. Jim?
Thank you very much, Bruce. And it's my pleasure to be here today. My name is Jim Fong. I am the Chief Research Officer at UPCEA. I've been with UPCEA now for about 12 years. And just to kind of follow along with Brad's theme here, I am a Gen Xer. I'm probably the older Gen Xer, 57 years old. And I just recently became an AARP member and used my first discount, I think, on a Marriott hotel stay. And so that's kind of I'm getting used to this mature learner thing, or this mature audience thing. But my wife does bring me in for discounts when there is an opportunity as needed here. So that's kind of just playing around here. Before I joined UPCEA 12 years ago, I had been with Penn State for a number of years, helping to launch online, but also actively involved with a lot of non-credit and with mature learner programs as well. So that's my foray here. And I'm excited to be part of this research. I'm excited that MindEdge sponsored it because, we've been spending a lot of time, on Gen Z and millennials and whatsoever. This is an important part of our portfolio, and how do we move forward here? And I think with higher education really kind of struggling, just being being overly weighted probably to the 18 to 22-year-old population, they're going to have to reach a little bit farther and a little bit deeper. And this is just one segment here. But as Bruce and Brad mentioned earlier, this audience often gets lumped together in one bucket, and that's the mature audience bucket. And Bruce kind of started peeling apart the layers here, and we have 4 segments here. If we had more research, and maybe we could have gotten more segments out, and maybe we could have found 6 or 8 segments. But a lot of it comes down to sample size. But the other piece here, which is really important, is that we have to be able to act on them. And so I think being able to act on 4 segments is really important. So those 4 segments there have got different qualities, and I think you can build plans around them. So with that being said, excuse me, let me just dive into the research. What we have is we have perspectives toward learning. Which of the following best describe your perspectives toward learning new skills, new subjects, additional training, or whatsoever? And you can see there that overall, about 1 in 5 kind of fall into this. I've grown more interested in learning about new subjects, additional training, and continuing my education. The next sections, I've become more interested. That's about 41%. And then the other sectors are 33% saying no change in interest. And then you've got a small percentage that says that they're less interested about learning. But everybody wants to learn, and it cuts across all age groups here to a different degree. As you get older, you're more likely to say no change, but you could still be learning, but you haven't just changed as a result of aging here. However, the younger parts of the mature audience groups here are more likely to say they've grown more interested. So there's a little bit of an age factor that says, yes, I'm a mature learner now. I'm more interested now, and it could be for a number of different things. And that's what we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. Bruce, next slide, please. So what we also learned here is that, as Bruce outlined with those segments here, there's a lot of differences just based on employment, unemployment, or retiree status here. You could be unemployed but still seeking work there. And so you can see that if you're still employed, or if you're unemployed, you still have a high level of interest about learning new subjects and new topic. So you haven't really kind of settled in yet. Retired, on the other hand, it's kind of more toward the no change or becoming slightly less interested. But motivations for learning now. Motivations and behaviors are very different here. Now we have people that have shown a baseline interest or an increased level of interest in learning. However, what would actually get them to learn more? What are some of those motivating factors? This chart kind of shows 4 major factors there. And what you have here is personal growth, to keep the mind active, to increase knowledge, and for a career or job. And you're probably saying to yourself, that's master the obvious, we know that. But there are some differences based on those segments that Bruce talked about it. So as we kind of go into some of the demographic differences, this is where it gets kind of interesting. Just based on age alone and not factoring anything else, the largest bar there is career or job. So if you're 50, if you go back there, Bruce, if you're 50 to 55 years old, you're more likely to be on the career or job piece here. If you're a little bit older, in 56 to 60, such as my age here, it's almost a split between personal growth and enjoyment, as well as career or job. And then if you get older, that would actually, you start shifting a little bit. If you're over 65, there's a greater tendency to keep the mind active here. Now that might be assumed, in the 50 to 55 category as you're learning for your career or job, that your mind is staying active here, but it might not necessarily be true when you're over 65 and less likely to work. There are other factors that play into this as one ages. So the employment status, also things changed as well. Career or job, employed. So just keeping the skill set fresh there is probably really important. If you're retired, then the most dominant ones keep the mind active, and that might correlate with age as well. If you're unemployed, now personal growth and enjoyment, you might be looking at being more competitive in the workplace, or becoming more stable in your job, or in your future job, or acquiring new skills. So these are all things that are playing into the whole interest and motivations toward learning. So in terms of delivery, this was kind of an odd one, but obviously, if you ask them what they're extremely interested in or very interested in, we've got a group now that is very interested or extremely interested in learning fully online. I think we've kind of matured as a society here. My 15 years ago, 20 years ago at Penn State, when we did similar research here, we found the older age segments very resistant to learning online. It was actually kind of the opposite with face-to-face, more likely to do things face-to-face. And hybrid, you've got something in the middle here. But it's kind of one of these challenges here that as you develop programs and you look at content, are you going to be able to reach one better by being fully online, or are you going to be more successful in a face-to-face type of program for specific content? I think our experts will have more insight to this, but I'm just kind of noting the statistics. They're kind of in the trenches working on these types of issues. So paying for education, this one is kind of an interesting one as well, because for some, you've got some that are at peak disposable income. If you look at the census data in terms of household or family income, you also have some that are not quite at their financial goals, and they might have to work longer. Then you've got others that are with fixed incomes or at the Social Security levels and are more frugal with their income. So how would they pay for education? If they're employed, 45% or roughly less than half of them are in the category of they pay less than $500 for a program that they value. So that says 55% may pay more than $500. Now that shifts pretty much based on being retired, unemployment, or unemployed. They become more cost sensitive. So value is clearly going to be an issue, as well as other factors here. So when we look at preferred education providers, what is the role of higher education here? So one would, there's been a lot of urban myths or hypotheses about, how are colleges and universities perceived. Bruce and I have done a lot of millennial research and Gen Z research where colleges and universities are taking a little bit of a hit from a reputation standpoint. Level of trust is still there, but there's other national studies that show that that's declining slightly. But among our mature learner audience, that is actually, we're still in pretty good shape. Yes, we'd like to see more green here, but 17% say they'd be extremely interested in a college or university providing education or training. Another 26%, or for a total of 43%, would be they're very interested or extremely interested. Then you've got a somewhat interested group. So it's still roughly eight out of 10 people that are in this interested group here. Do we want more green? Sure, we do. But the percentage that is leaning toward colleges and universities as opposed to private providers is a little bit higher. And so we're positioned well to provide education to the mature learner. So opinions on continuing education. So this is kind of an interesting thing as well. As we mentioned earlier, when considering new learning skills, continuing education, receiving additional training, how important are the following factors? Cost of the program came up clearly on top here, with 54% saying extremely important, 39% saying very important. It's important to all of them. Reputation is also very important. So, these are trade-offs that may happen down the line here. Will they pay for the cost of a program at a certain level for a high reputation provider? I think also the other part of it here is clearly content, assuming that they have the content that they want. One of the other parts that comes up in a few places here is the length of program and the ability to complete classwork on their own time. They want that flexibility as well. And so some of these things about the format are kind of interesting in terms of how the program's set up. Down toward the bottom here is advanced career, although that comes up still pretty high in terms of one or two of the segments here. Next slide, please. So when we look at the four segments, some kind of interesting things happened here. If you look at Madeline, who's the younger, mature learner here, what's most important here is career or job, and then personal growth, and then the cost of the program. I'm sorry, not the cost of to make more money. So there's got to be a return on investment here. To increase knowledge is important, but it's only 10%. So the most important part is career. Joshua, on the other hand, who is unemployed, is also looking at personal growth, but also career or job. So he's kind of focused in on those career attributes, connection to the economy. And then Norman, who's recently retired, is looking at more about keeping his mind active, but also some personal growth and enjoyment. So Norman's kind of shifted into this thing about, I want to learn, but I want to learn, my things my way kind of thing. And then we have Lisa, who's been retired for maybe 5 or 10 years at this point, and she's looking at keeping her mind active as well as personal growth. So you can see a lot of these things are in the same place based on what their career goals or where they are in their retirement. And so it's kind of an interesting kind of dilemma that's happening here. So when you look at important factors here, what's most important to them, you can see that $ is either in the first position or the second position. That's the cost of the program. And then you have the clock there, freedom to complete the coursework on my time. So they want that flexibility. So one of the things that's happening out there is, are we designing programs for, based on what we think they need, or are we designing programs based on what they want and their behaviors and their interests are? And so that's something where I would say, are we user-centric enough or not at this point? Reputation of the provider also plays into this as well. If they're going to pay for a program and they've got a high level of value put onto it, they want good reputation. You almost have got to, pay a fair price and yet over deliver on the reputation of the provider. That's why I think the university piece is very important. Then after that, things shift. You can see the briefcase, ease of finding a job, is only important to Madeline and Joshua, who are still career focused, but the length of the program still is important to Joshua, Norman, and Lisa. And then you've got things that swap here. So these are things where I think it's important for the marketing message, but also how do you actually promote the attributes of the program or the program that you're creating. So the perspectives toward learning here. So this is a little bit kind of a harder chart to kind of to figure out sometimes. But let me actually go through it a little slow. Which of the following best describes your perspectives toward learning new skills, learning about new subjects, receiving additional training, or continuing education as you've gotten older? So Madeline is still very much more interested. And you can see Joshua, not so much, no change of interest. Joshua's trying to find a job. He's unemployed right now. But he's interested in certain skills, but I think it's more about, has it motivated him or not as he's becoming older or not? And Norman's kind of in the middle. And then Lisa, who's been retired for a few years, there's been no change. It's like she's down that path already. She's less interested of the group here. But just to kind of wrap things up, we also have the next slide is how do they all differ? One thing that I felt was kind of interesting is once you start putting them all together, certain stories come up. If you look at Madeline's interested in pretty much everything across the board here, but the different degrees here. Madeline is still unemployed. Interest in continuation education is high. Interest in online delivery is the highest among all the segments. And also, there's other high attributes, very cost sensitive and very concerned about the reputation of the provider, and also very interested in technology as well as job upskilling. Joshua, on the other hand, is unemployed, but I was kind of surprised about the job upskilling wasn't as high, but he's interested in technology. He's also very cost sensitive because he's out of work. And, he's more likely to be unemployed, but there's those that are employed. It's 42% of the segment. So interest in continuing education is pretty high, and online delivery is kind of middle of the road as well. Norman, who's just recently retired, is interested in continuing education and interested in online. And some other important factors here is it's all about personal enrichment, although technology's got a little bit of interest as well. Lisa, on the other hand, personal enrichment for the most part, but there is some issue around cost and reputation of the provider. So these are all things where looking at these personas and thinking about how do you communicate and develop programs around them, I think it's very important. And again, it's back to, they're one size doesn't fit all. And I think our professionals, as we get closer here, they'll be able to shed some insight into what are some of these challenges about reaching, one, two, or all of these groups in terms of their program development and marketing. So as we wind into things, let's talk about the impact of higher education. Clearly, this group is a sizable group. We talked about that there are 90+ million folks here. I'm a researcher in all this. I look at the trends here. I look at this group as being a very opportunistic group here. There's higher education is going to need to shift and pivot away from not to be fully constricted to 18 to 22-year-olds, but they need to shift to other audiences here. I want to hear from our three panelists in terms of what their insights are, because they do this every day. They develop programs, they market to these groups ongoing here. So as we move forward here, let me introduce our panelists and have them provide a deeper introduction and also reflect upon the research study in general. So I'm going to ask Vicki Cook, Megan Novak, and Amanda Rhodes to introduce themselves, have them tell you a little bit about themselves and what they do at their respective institutions, and also to provide a transition in terms of what was their reaction toward the research, or what insights they have as a result of seeing the research. So let me pass the baton over to Vicki Cook first.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to be with you all today, and I've seen some good comments coming up and great questions in the Q&A, so keep those coming. I'm Vicki Cook. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Online, Professional, and Engaged Learning at the University of Illinois Springfield. And we are a public institution that sits in the state capital of Illinois. We do a lot of training and professional development for state audiences, as well as doing other professional development and enrichment opportunities for this audience. So a couple of things that I would like to reflect on is thinking about Norman as that 63-year-old in that third category that he may be leaning toward, as we're looking at the research, he may be leaning toward thinking about not so much employment like our first two individuals are, but maybe re-employment. As Irene put in the chat, it is really important to think about what this group of individuals is thinking regarding, should I be retired? Should I be fully retired? Should I go back to work? We hear a lot about COVID had caused a lot of retirements to happen, but then people weren't really prepared for retirement, and now we're seeing them coming back to work, not only in part-time capacities, but in full-time capacities. So I think that also reflects on that preferred development. I think COVID had played a large part in the idea of whether we feel comfortable in an online format or not, and if we learned more. I think a lot of our more mature audience, even if they weren't involved in technical jobs before they retired or moved into that area, they are now learning to utilize technology in many ways. I think an error that we could make is to assume that if we offer more online, we'll need more support. We have a lot of learners who need support at all levels, depending on what they're learning and what the platform is. So those are a couple of reflections. I do wonder on the preferred provider, and I'd love to know if these folks at the mature level, of which I am one, I am definitely a boomer, if we were going to be more likely to go back to the institution that we graduated from originally. If we're an alum, are we more likely to look at that institution to help us with our continued learning needs? I think that's a question that certainly we're going to be looking at more fully. And I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Vicki. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you. This research is invaluable to the field of lifelong learning and mature learners. So, I think as I reflect on the takeaways that we have here from the UPCEA MindEdge study, I was really interested in Lisa's profile. She's specifically interested in personal enrichment. Pardon me, I didn't introduce myself. let me, I was getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited about the research that I didn't introduce myself, pardon me. So I'm Megan Novak. I'm the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at Rutgers University in New Jersey. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, we are an intentional learning community for adults starting at age 50. So we are exactly what we're talking about today. We serve this, mature learner, and we are part of, the Lifelong Learning Network of OLLIs. That's the acronym, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, one of 125 OLLIs across the country. So we're really fortunate to be part of that network of lifelong learning institutes. I was reflecting on the research and was really struck by the fact that this particular research showed that online learning was the driving force, the driving preference. And I have to wonder if that's an indicator of post-pandemic behavior specifically, because that's certainly what we're seeing here at our institute. Pre-pandemic, we were completely in person, and that was really, and that continues to be part of our mission, right? To be a learning community, an intentional learning community that cultivates relationships and friendships and enriches one's life, in addition to providing, personally enriching non-credit academic courses. So something that, we had to pivot to immediately come the pandemic were, online programming, and that was, frankly, we had no idea how our population was going to respond to that. Overwhelmingly, they took to it like a fish to water. And now we too have a demand for online programming, and we're having difficulty, in fact, getting students back into the classroom in person. I was very interested in that aspect of the research, and look forward to additional research that comes out about that. I think it's really nuanced. So let me turn it over to Amanda, who can actually speak more, a little bit more to this aspect. Amanda.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, I'm happy to be here with you all today. I'm Amanda Rhodes. I am the Associate Director of the Osher National Resource Center. We are housed at the School of Professional Studies at Northwestern University. And I get to work with all 125 Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes, like the one that Megan directs. And today, I think the very first kind of major takeaway I had after, reading through the research and hearing this presentation is really just that this research is so needed. It is a direct reflection of what we do every day in our network of Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes. And we really are seeing all of these different personas come through. We're seeing the shift, as Megan mentioned, a huge shift to online learning that was somewhat unexpected. And I would believe, early on in the pandemic, not everyone was certain it would even happen. And now as we get to the other side, I hear from many of our programs that it's actually quite difficult to get people back into the classroom. It's very intentional across the network of Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes that there's a community built in each one of these places, which really is easily built and felt in that in-person interaction. But we are now starting to learn and grow into how we do this remotely because there is a high demand. So I'm grateful for this research. I'm grateful to be here with this group of people today sharing this.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Bruce, thank you very much for getting the questions here. I'd like to ask the panelists, and you can jump in as you see fit. We have 3 questions that we really want to learn more from you on. And the first one is really looking at the results of the research. And if you could give us additional insights about the personas and how your institution, either addresses a certain persona type or how you actually develop programming, that'd be great. But I'd love to learn more about your insights toward the personas. Clearly, we have Madeline, who's kind of still very career focused, and we've got Norman, who's recently retired. But Lisa is also a little bit farther along. But I'd love to learn more about your insights in terms of how it connects back to the research here. There's clearly some findings. There's clearly beliefs about towards the institution. There's learning online versus face-to-face. But if you could give me some expertise about some of those differences that are based on any of these segments, I'd appreciate that. So it's a wide open question to any of you.
I can start. This is Vicki, and for our institution, we focus on the first 3 personas, and those are really the student personas that we have built out to try to address those who are currently employed and who need some type of professional development, those who may be unemployed but are looking for employment. So they either need to retool or reskill or come up with different ways to look at employment. Often those individuals may have been trying to do career changing, and now they're at an impasse with a career and need a new way to look at their career for whatever reason. And then that third person who's most recently retired but may be rethinking that retirement, and maybe they want to work part-time or maybe they want to work full-time, but thinking about what their options are. And they also seem to be the group that are looking at wanting things very quickly to move forward for them. They don't want to take a lot of time. So they're really looking for those short-term, kind of hard-hitting types of professional development that will move them forward pretty quickly. So we experience those differences. We do not have a portfolio that really addresses Lisa and where she is in life. I am sure that Madeline or Amanda could address Lisa's needs much better than I. So I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in here. And that was exactly what I was going to say, Vicki. I think across the network, and of course, this is speaking pretty generally about 125 very unique programs. On the whole, I think we do lean a little bit toward the needs of Lisa and Norman, right? And I think as we are learning and growing, we are now needing to figure out ways to program better for the Joshuas and Madelines. I'll let Megan speak a little bit more specifically about the experience at her institute, but sort of from a national overview, I do believe that's where we have been. I think this shift to online has helped us realize that there are so many new ways that we can program, whether that is the time of day that we're providing these things, right? If we're thinking about people who are still fully employed, a 9 a.m. class and a 2 p.m. class may not be the best option for them, right? So as we shift and we start to think about these new personas, having this kind of information and being able to look at the persona of a Madeline or a Joshua, I think will be really helpful in figuring out those changes we need to make, not just to what we offer, but how we offer options for different groups of people, right? My thought has always been, right, I've been studying older adults for a very long time, and it's always been so strange to me that on the whole, we've thought of them as sort of one big group, right? If you're under 50, we would never expect a kindergartner and a high schooler and a college student to want or need the same things in their education. So why would we expect that for everyone from 50 to 100 plus? So I think the personas are really helpful in that.
Yeah, Amanda, I thank you so much for those comments. And I think, for us, our institute, we're getting ready to celebrate our 30th year. And, so a a challenge or an opportunity, that we're experiencing right now is those individuals who started our program are now in their late 80s, 90s. And as we reach out to, the Madelines, to try to bring in and attract younger individuals to, perpetuate the longevity of our program, this research was actually incredibly validating in terms of our experience. We have reached out to 50 plus communities, countless 50 plus communities, areas where we would find these segments of the population, and we're programming outside of our normal programming times, so evenings, Saturdays, to try to attract the working individual, but it's crickets. We're not getting any responses, and this research is really indicative of the fact that there's perhaps just not the interest, that the individual is really focused on, the Madeline is really focused on, one's career at that point in life, and not so focused on personal enrichment, perhaps. There are, of course, exceptions to that, but it's not, as, widespread as we need. The lifelong learning movement started with a group of teachers who said, we want to continue our learning, and we're going to start these discussion groups, right? That's how this began, and from there it started flourishing and evolved into, what we see across the country now. So, but it's really interesting. It was validating for us.
Great. Thank you very much, panelists here. I want to kind of, before we go into a Q&A, I want to ask you one other question here, just because we have so many questions coming in on Q&A. I don't want to rob people of this opportunity. But let me actually ask that last question here. Would you stock your shelves differently as a result of the research? And I ask this in a more multidimensional way now, because we have people that don't want to pay a lot, or some people that Madeline may pay a little bit more, but we have 4 segments that are still very, very cost sensitive. And we have that, I think Sandra in our audience made a comment about online, and how the pandemic may have kind of forced this mature learner to adopt new skills and tools, and so they're more likely and willing to learn online. But how do you factor in the online, the cost sensitivity, and how do you develop content? Now, I think Amanda, you said there's 125 programs. Do you find like faculty that are just interested in these, and as a result you get 125 programs, or it comes into a national clearinghouse and whatever sticks in your market sticks? Or do you actually do some research and figure it out? Or is there a way that you stock your shelves not just on content, but on delivery and cost sensitivity? Because the research also said that length of program is also very important. So all of these factors play into that product that you offer the mature learner. So I'd like to throw it all out there for the 3 of you to kind of reflect upon before I hand the ball back over to Chris.
Well, I can just say that we have a strategic approach to providing continuing education and professional development. And so our approach is probably going to continue to move along that strategy. We have some definite goals What this research does is really reconfirms for me that we are on the right track with the strategies that we have built. And so I was so happy when I first read the report, because this was needed research to tell us, yes, we are headed in the right direction. The other thing that we're doing more of, talking about stocking shelves differently, is looking for additional partnerships. So really thinking about, if we have people who come to us and they say they want something that is not in our portfolio, who can we recommend them to, especially in an online format, because they don't have to be right down the road. And we really have been very comfortable reaching out to specific partners. Irene put in our Q&A about community colleges, and we do partner with some of our community colleges in our general region to point people to programs that they are offering as well. So I think that idea of partnership and thinking about how to best serve this audience's need, because this is a large group of individuals. This is a huge number, and thinking about what they will need as they continue to age, but also as they continue to have this wide variety of needs, I think is something that we have to, as providers, consider very strategically.
Yeah, so I'll mention briefly whenever I was thinking about how we stock our shelves, right? So we do have these 125 programs. Each one is situated within an institution of higher education, such as Megan's program. And I think, as I get to talk to directors from all of these programs, I get to talk to volunteer leaders from each one of these 125 programs. I think the restocking really comes in so many different ways. My initial thought was, how do we create content for Madeline and Joshua, which may not be what we've always done, but also how do we become price sensitive? I had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks to meet with 8 of our directors from various programs to talk about how to price and how to make sure that we are best utilizing the offerings that we have to bring them to as many people as possible. Does that mean changing the price, changing the structure, changing how members are engaged with their program? And then, of course, also having online options and being able to see in this data here that no matter what our members are saying, whether they're telling us that they're really ready to come back in person, they continue to sort of vote with their registrations and register for classes that are online. So seeing again this set of data that says, hey, you should be stocking your shelves with online options, because that is where our members and our target audience really is.
Yeah, and finally, I think as with following up with what Vicki said, I agree. I think that this is research that tells us that we're also on the right track in terms of having a diverse set of offerings, in terms of pricing, and also in terms of length of content. We're really trying to make sure that it's not one size fits all, that we do have many different options, acknowledging that there are there are generations within our program. So that was very reassuring for us.
So thank you very much, panelists. And I got to throw the ball back over to Chris, because Chris has been monitoring the Q&A, and there's so much interest here, and just to be able to prioritize, I'm going to let Chris do the dirty work there, or the hard work there.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, everybody. The session has been fantastic so far today. I can't thank everybody enough for their insights, especially from the panel. We had some fantastic questions. This is a bit of a two-parter, so I'm going to go with both at once. Hang in with me. So Bud asks, can you speak to the pros and cons of open access courses, where we need to come up with relevant courses marketed to a broad audience, versus custom corporate, where we design a curriculum to meet the specific needs of one cohort, typically from an employer? And if we add that in with Irene's question related to corporate investing in older learners, I'm curious about what you might see related to broad courses that might be universally available to an older learner, or skills development, or custom things that employers may come to you about that might fit this particular category. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things that obviously that we have to think about as we think about a portfolio or stocking our shelves is what is the competition? And so there are a lot of ways to learn for free online. YouTube, I did some research recently and found out that YouTube is now the #1 social media in like 10 different countries. And so there are a lot of options for free learning online. And our older adults are getting quite adept at connecting online and being a part of the social media scene. And so I think that we would have to be very careful as we develop a portfolio to make sure that the ROI is there. Certainly, there are a number of institutions who do almost teaser courses. So there's a free module, and then if you want to learn more, then you enroll. I think that will really depend on the situation that you find yourselves in, the audience in your area that you are truly targeting to serve, and your resources that you have available. So I don't think from my perspective, there's not a one size fits all answer to that. It's a great question. And I think it will really depend on the needs analysis of the audience that you specifically are trying to serve. Amanda or Madeline, what do you think? Megan?
Yeah, I think on the first part of the question related to the pros and cons of open access, as we all provide something that has a cost associated within the OSHA network, I think what we really kind of focus in on, as we all are aware that there are so many free options. You can find a YouTube video about any topic under the sun, right? So what we've been really focused in on is trying to make sure there's added value, right? It's not just pulling that information from the course that you're kind of passively watching, right? There are discussion opportunities. You have friends and colleagues sitting in the class next to you that you can follow up with between classes. There are other ways to engage, so that way, yes, someone could choose an open access sort of educational opportunity, or they can choose something that hopefully provides them with that next step of connection and community.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, so there's a follow-up. There's a great question by Sandra in the chat, and you should look at the answered tab to kind of get to the research that she did on that front. But I'm going to read the question. I'd be interested in what the panel has to say here. So she's referencing the delivery format preference in the research that we did, and it certainly shows the impact of the shift towards online learning as a result of COVID. Sandra did a similar large-scale study with mature adult learners prior to the pandemic, and the preferred learning format was face-to-face. So how do we think the preferred learning format will develop over the next 5 to 10 years? Will we continue on that pathway, or do you think we might find a regression back to getting in person, especially as we get further away from pandemic restrictions?
I can start and then jump in. I think we're going to see more online. I think we're going to see more augmented reality being used with this audience. I think that we're going to have more options with having automated delivery systems. Use of AI is going to expand. And I believe that just like the rest of higher ed, that we're going to see technology really give a bump up. And this audience is going to benefit from that and be a part of that growth overall.
I agree, Vicki. I mean, I think as boomers who are more comfortable with technology age, we're only going to see more technology in the space rather than less, right? I think the challenge is going to be how do we continue to cultivate a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection in this new realm, right? I think because that's one of the, we can't all be siloed. There needs to be, there's intrinsic value in learning. I think we can all agree on that. But I think what gets missed often is the invaluable connection that you have when you're sitting in a classroom, when you're you have lunch after with your friends, when you go out for coffee, when you have those off the cuff conversations, you're making those human connections, so how do you transfer them to the increase in technology that we're going to see? I think that's what's going to be really interesting. That's where what I'm curious about.
I completely agree with Megan. I think that is our next challenge, right? Is how do we create that same sense of community that people have always felt within the classroom? But I do also completely agree that we are going to continue increasing the use of technology across the network. We've really seen that there are so many reasons why people are sticking with online, right? And they sort of fall in all different age categories as far as what these reasons are. It's so much more than just the reasons that sort of brought us into this in the pandemic. We now have people who, they just have a preference because it's more easily accessible. We have accessibility issues, right? People can turn on subtitles so that way they can better hear what others are saying in class. We have people who provide caregiving services to a partner, a child, a spouse, a loved one, and they cannot leave their house for 2 hours to go to a class. So the ability to be in the next room and connect with their peers in this way has been really useful. So I think the reasons why online will continue to increase are very broad, and they go much beyond all of the reasons that we began this in a pandemic. But I think you're right, Megan, that the biggest challenge now is how do we continue to create that community that we had in person with the increase in online options.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So we got time for one more. It's a two-parter, and I might tag in Jim and Bruce on this one as well because it references the research a little bit. One, the question says, it's from an anonymous. It says, I'm from a highly educated area. Was there any indication if those beyond a bachelor degree were more or less likely to desire to continue their education, especially for those post-retirement? In short, were they burnt out on learning or were they wanting more? And related from Lynn, she's asking about curriculum decisions that might have changed since COVID. Does the research show a shift in topics of interest to the older lifelong learner post-pandemic, especially around academic topics versus lighter content? So it's kind of a two-parter. Do we see anything that tells us that those who've been learning all along are just kind of done with it? And then from a continuing perspective, are topics changing for folks who are engaging in the learning?
I'd have to say that this is a question where, I'd love to pontificate or give you my opinion on it, but I'd rather give you a data-driven decision and say, I don't think we have the answer to that. Or it's a tough question to answer because it's something where we'd have to study it over time to see whether, or have some kind of baseline to compare it against. Sandra, I read her dissertation. It's a wonderful dissertation, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to read it. But and I think one of the things that came out in the Q&A is the fact that the pandemic changed a lot of behavior. It caused people to adopt new technologies and learn in a different way faster. And I think it also, not only did it help our mature learner, but it also helped our faculty in a lot of our campuses. The faculty that were resistant to teach online all of a sudden had to do that. And it's sort of like what Brad said earlier. He had to learn, Zoom and all sorts of other things. I think there's a lot of things that people will be studying for in terms of the pandemic impact toward it. But I don't think that there's ways, we'd have to kind of go either more in depth to really understand about, is there a certain behavioral set that says, I'm always going to learn this way and I'm going to continue learning this way. until I stop at a certain point to say I'm done with learning? I think that's a very deep question that that our study cannot answer, but that's a hard way of saying no.
Got it. Thank you, Jim. It sounds like something we might be able to study in future studies, which leads us to the end of the session. Folks, thank you so much for joining us in the audience. We will share these slides. As you can see on the screen, you can access the full report there. We'd very much like to thank Bruce and Jim from UPCEA, Vicki, Megan, and Amanda on the panel for your fantastic insights today, and for all of you out there for joining us. We hope to see you next time and have a fantastic rest of your afternoon. Take care.